Our next speaker is Denis Barnett. This past summer, Denis set off on a self-propelled Arctic rowing trip to discover firsthand what effects climate change is having on the Canadian Arctic. The team of 3 young men and 1 old man took on the challenge of a lifetime. Now, I want to stop it there just for a moment on this intro, is that I'm that old man. This is classic Denis, and he's a comedian, and he's an extremely funny guy, and that really makes him an enjoyable guy to be on a trip with. It's interesting because actually when we were out there, he had one reporter, I think it was BCTV, convinced that Paul Gleason was seasick for the entire journey. And he had another CBC reporter convinced we were actually going to film a music video when we were out there. So this is Denis, but anyway, I digress. The team quickly came to terms with the fact that the Arctic is a very unforgiving part of the world. Not much is known about the area. The distances are vast, and even the locals don't venture far from the villages. The weather and waters of the Northwest Passage are ferocious. The barren landscape is breathtaking and raw. You don't really live in the Arctic the way we live in a city. In the Arctic, you survive. Denis is a regular guy with perhaps 1 or 2 loose screws that went seeking an adventure, and he found it in bucket loads. His talk tonight will cover one very trying 48-hour period of his trip last summer. Please welcome Denis Barnett.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm definitely not a comedian. When I get really nervous, I try and hide it behind cheesy jokes. So you might hear 1 or 2 coming out now. Yeah, I don't really have a message. I have a story. Last year and the year before, I was sitting in the audience here and I was looking for an adventure. And it just kind of came about organically from kind of in this room that I found myself with athletes like Kevin up in the Arctic. So this 48 hours of madness, I call it, is what you can expect at the sharp end of an adventure to the Arctic. So I'll get into it and we'll see where we go. We were trying to cross a bay up in the Arctic. We had weather reports that are kind of not great kind of in a local area because there's such a big landscape up there and so such a broad kind of weather pattern. So you're kind of coming up with our own, I suppose, opinion on what the weather's going to be. So we didn't take a chance, but we had to go across this bay, and we got about 2/3 of the way across it when the weather changed dramatically. The wind came up very strong, and the sea started to churn a lot. We weren't going to make it to the other end of the bay, so we started to lose ground into this bay. What you would do in a situation like that, in a rowing boat like that, is you deploy what's called a sea anchor. It's like a big parachute that grabs a whole bunch of water and it slows you down from the wind's effects. This worked for us for a couple of kilometers and slows you right down until we had enough. We had a low enough water to deploy a regular anchor, which actually stopped us in our tracks. What happened then when we took a bit of rest in the cabin was that a very big iceberg came in, unbeknownst to us. It pinned our anchor to the ground, and it started to slowly roll over onto the front of the boat. So I've gone from sitting in row 22 in seat C to here in the space of 6 months. So this iceberg is rolling onto the boat. Kevin wakes up first, jumps up, cuts the line. As soon as he touches it with a knife, the boat swings around immediately, and now we're bobbing around in this bay with all sorts of icebergs floating around. We spent about 4 hours trying to hold our position, so rowing furiously into the wind. Your hands are cut to shreds. You can only handle about 20 minutes of rowing before you're exhausted, and we've got to take shifts until eventually we found some respite, and that was us kind of, we ice screwed ourselves onto an iceberg, which eventually that one gave up on us as well, and we were back rowing again. We eventually found some respite in a small little bay where we were able to shelter from the storm. That's actually me just tired, not crying, but I thought I'd throw it in there because it could be either. That was a pretty traumatic day, to say the least. And then the very next day, we headed off again when the storm kind of dissipated. That's hanging around there for a while. We headed off again, and we had to go around a headland. And this headland was called Cape Parry. Now, for those of you who sail or put yourselves in these situations in the sea, whenever you hear the word Cape, I always associate it with a villain because they all have these flowing capes. It's bad news, basically. You don't know what you're going to get. We came around in fog like that. It was a lot rougher. We came around this cape. There's all sorts of swirling winds and waves. It's where two big bodies of water meet. Essentially, we were left spinning around in very thick fog, not being able to see where we'd come from or where we were trying to go. The wind then blew up quite strongly, and we were being blown out into the sea. One of the main reasons that we weren't able to finish the expedition was that there was big chunks of ice floating around in the open water, and if we were blown out into this ice, there's no way that the boat would have survived. The reality is that in water that cold, if you end up in the water or if you lose the boat, you're looking at maybe an hour or two, so rescue isn't really an option. Eventually, when the boat stopped spinning, it was because it was being blown out to sea. We saw from our GPS there was one small island about the size of 3 soccer pitches that we could potentially make. So we made a beeline for this island, which is kind of where we were going anyway. Because of the thick, that's it there. It looks lovely, doesn't it? Because of the thick fog, we were about 80 meters away from this island before we actually saw it. So we're all out on deck, we're all wearing our gear, and we're all very silent. And I don't know, I know Kevin was terrified. Frank Wolf is down there, he was terrified as well. Myself and Paul, 2 Irish guys, we were kind of holding it together, thankfully. But we sometimes the less you know, the better, you know. So we arrive into this island, and we're hoping that there's a beach to beach the boat on. A lot of the coastline up there gets so beaten up by the ice that it's cliffs. It could be the size of the screen there. So we are maybe 80 meters from this island. All as we can see are cliffs, and we have to make a decision. Do we go to the left or do we go to the right? Thankfully, we went around to the left, and we did come across a small beach, maybe 60 meters long, and it's basically a boulder garden. We had reinforced our boat with Kevlar and all sorts of things in the event that we would have to beach on something like this. So there's a shotgun right in front of my head. That's when you have polar bears hanging around your tent. That's the kind of thing that you become very comfortable with. So we find this beach anyway, and the seas are very strong and they're very rough, as you saw on the previous slide. And eventually we had to beach the boat. So we just took a chance and went straight up onto the beach. Had we not hit that island, we wouldn't have got to see all this beautiful terrain we got to afterwards. But we would have ended up in a situation where, anything really could have happened. When you get up into places like that, you really have to take the warnings that are coming your way. Those 48 hours put us in a position where, they put us in a position where we really had to take stock of what we were doing and the risks that we were taking. It's one thing going on these expeditions, but you're going to have to guarantee that you're coming back. We became much more in tune with the weather and the wind, and we kind of lowered our tolerance of risk. It slowed our progress after that, but thankfully we did end up making it back in one piece, even if we didn't get to complete the expedition that we set out on. When I set out to plan this talk, I started off with 22 minutes. I'm looking at my clock here now. I've got about 17 seconds left. So, is there anything I can tell you about Kevin? I know Kevin has the last word, so I won't go into that. I kind of been trying to backpedal on all the stuff I've said to him over the years. So for now, just leave it at that. It was a great adventure, and I went from sitting in one of those seats to doing this in the space of a couple of years. So just grab someone, find a way to raise the money, pick something, and just go and do it, because you'll love it.
I got a little PTSD there, post-traumatic stress disorder, just listening to that story again. That's from Frank Heckler. I know we talked about it before, and it's paraphrasing actually T.S. Eliot. And what he said was that, at the end of all exploring is to come back to where you started, to see it for the first time. So I know that when I did my first major adventure up in Alaska eons ago, I came back very different. You know, it was just a 2-month period of time, but I changed a lot in subtle ways, but in some profound ways too. And I'm wondering, how have you changed?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of a cliche because it is a cliche. It's like, you know, I don't sweat the small stuff. I don't think my boss is here, but my job is so doesn't really hold much relevance anymore. But like, there's things that now that I want to do that I used to be worried about, long-term goals that I have now, which just seem like a slam dunk. There's other adventures that I want to go on that I would have never thought about. And once you cross the line where you get involved in something like that, and it's not just the being out there rowing, that's the easy bit. It's actually getting it started. And like, how many hundreds of hours did we spend getting a boat that was purposely built to get to that position? Like, it's incredible. So when you know what's involved and what it takes to do it, you know, I just can't wait to crack on with the next one. So all these day-to-day details I just laugh at now. I used to get really stressed about it, and I don't. And you know, that's totally changed my outlook.
Awesome. That boat, by the way, is in my driveway, and if anyone wants to buy it, they're more than welcome to. Denis Barnett, everybody.